Now, Peterson, of course, would have a problem with that if the I becomes the ultimate legislator of what ought to be the case, because who the heck are you? What the heck do you know? You don't have a clue what you want, right? I think this is position on selfhood, that we're largely unconscious creatures, and that we largely are blind to what will lead to the greater good and what will lead to a form of life that we will be happy with once we look back. He's basically right on that. We don't know what we want, and we don't know what the attitudes are that in the end will feel most fulfilling to us. But Sam's point seems to be, on the other hand, that we can test it, and there is no other way around. There's no other way to find that out except by testing it and by experimenting with the different self-conceptions. What will not work in any case is to use any kind of divine providence or divine rule, so to say, to tell you how you ought to behave and which path you ought to follow in order to find the most realized way of being in this world. So I guess what they would agree on the other hand, is that of course we can use literature, of course we can use the experiences of past generations to build on. It's something that has been proven to work for many people, as something that we can test for ourselves and see where it leads us. But there is no immediate way from the past into the future. We have to test it, we have to adapt it to the new situations and new challenges of today. There is no way into knowing how you ought to behave in an absolute way and what you ought to follow up in an absolute way prior to experimenting. Now, in integral theory, the only thing that comes close to a categorical imperative, this is an imperative that is an absolute ought. It is not of the form, if you want to be free, then do this, or if you want to be happy, then do this. The only thing that comes close to a categorical imperative, something that you must want, something that if once you realize it, you can't end up but not wanting it, is development. That's the only thing that's somewhat near to being a categorical imperative, even though Weber at some point says that you can also turn it into a hypothetical imperative of the form, if you want to be more developed, then do this and that. And the fact simply seems to be that most people who develop their consciousness, most people whose world spaces grow, in the end, looking back, actually say it was something that is intrinsically good. It's something that once you've realized it, you can't just unwant. You can't go back into having a smaller world space. You can't really want to go back into the smaller world space. The image for this kind of move would be the guy in the Matrix, Cypher. I can't remember his name. You know, the guy in the first movie who actually is the big traitor, and or was it in the third movie? I can't remember. The guy who is the big traitor and wants to live in the illusion and chooses to stay in the illusion. Wilber's argument seems to be that once you have really truly realized your world space growing, you can't but want growth. You can't but be a person who wants more perspective.